This morning we had GAYTON Mckenzie here, and he said that if the DA were to die on this hill, the EFF have already said they'll come in. So the government of national unity will continue, but the DA will be out, the EFF will be in, and he said, please don't do that.
So I think GAYTON is on the wrong side of this equation. South African companies are now taking their produce, putting it on trucks, getting it to the border, taking it into Mozambique, paying for an escort in a country in conflict to get it to a privately run port in Mozambique by a South African company, Grindrod, and shipping it from there because that's more efficient than our ports. What I've just described is ludicrous. GAYTON, I find him a very entertaining speaker, but the fact is, he's now in the camp of proposing a 1% VAT increase over 2 years. That's a bad...
Guys, I really suspected that there will be a clash between these two guys, Mike Burke of the DA and GAYTON Mckenzie of the Patriotic Alliance. Because, you know, in the last video I made with Rob Hersov at Hermanos, where he was actually giving a speech, explaining one of the reasons why it seems that the GNU, especially the GNU members, are low-key allowing the passage of these bills that are against what would be called the theoretical tenets of the DA's position in South Africa's politics, meaning the Bella Act. We know that the DA is not in support of the Bella Act. The NHI, the DA is consistently fighting against that. Expropriation without compensation, that was really, in a way, it was a big step on the toe of the DA. Rob Hersov explained that GAYTON Mckenzie, in a discussion with GAYTON Mckenzie, explained to him that one of the reasons why the GNU really must not break is because of the fact that Jacob Zuma, or what he called the MK party, is actually just at the rear mirror there, okay? And that, you know, some of the sacrifices that the DA and maybe some other of these other parties in the GNU have been actually making in the passage of these bills have been in a way not to allow the MK party have a footing. Because according to GAYTON Mckenzie, if the GNU collapses, you know, MK party would, Jacob Zuma is actually the major threat, and that MK party will take over and all of that. And so because of that, it appears that, you know, there have been these major sacrifices that the DA and other parties in the GNU seem to have been allowing because of the fact that they try to keep the GNU together. Now, Mike Burke is actually breaking that down, arguing that that perspective, you know, seems to be getting on his nerves. And he's actually arguing, especially in terms of this 1% VAT increase from 15% to 16% over the course of, I think this is over the course of 2 years. So that was the new proposal that Minister of Finance Gordon Gwana actually proposes, that rather than the 2% VAT increase that was initially proposed, that then ended up leading to the postponement of the 19th of February budget kind of like presentation, the new proposal now is a 1% VAT increase from the previous 15% to 16% over the span of 2 years. So this is actually what many people might call a slow decline, so to speak, or a slow, so to speak, if I use colloquial Nigerian word, it's kind of like punishment that is actually slow. All right. So it then speaks of the fact that Mike Burke argues that GAYTON Mckenzie is actually on the wrong side of this equation. If he, in the bid to fight for the GNU to stay together, and with the objective of keeping Jacob Zuma out, but still favor what he thinks is a punishment to South Africans. And you saw from my last video yesterday where Ike Kumalo argues that South Africans have been taxed to their breath. Or he actually, I'm trying to demonstrate how he says South Africans have been taxed out of their breath. That's how he did. And I was almost like, you know, I was like, this guy really is hilarious. But anyway, he speaks about how that South Africans already feel taxed to the tip of their, you know, to their neck, and any further taxation to South Africans would probably lead to a breakage. Today I was watching the trial of Kelly Smith, that's Jocelyn Smith's mother, and the boyfriend and all. Really touching. You know the pain it takes for a mother to engage in a trafficking of her own child. She argues, I don't know, it probably is true anyway, But I understand that the judges, I was watching the case, they said she was suffering from some substance abuse and addictions and all of that, and that she felt really under the weight of suffering in South Africa. And for a mother to come to the point where you have to traffic your own child, it's either in the words of Rob Hersoff, it's either sort of like a form of wickedness, so to speak, or something else. But I don't know, whatever the case is anyway, it just shows the fact to me, if I'm listening correctly, that South Africans really have had enough of this whole thing. And the taxes already, 15% VAT, on essential commodities already feels so high, taking it to 17%. And this is, if I'm listening to Mike Burke correctly, and the DA stance on this thing, that South Africans cannot really accept any tax. Even if you give it, he argues that even if it's a 1% VAT increase over 2 years, South Africans simply cannot afford to pay any other taxes. Rather, the DA is trying to really propose a cut to some expenditure. I think there was one of them, he argued that if the DA can actually cut these advertisements to certain things that, kind of like add to the expenditures of public spending and some other issues. I think you'll be hearing them in this video anyway. He speaks about how the corporates in South Africa now have to even send or export some of their goods to a port in Mozambique. I don't know if probably that's the Beira port, but that port was already argued during the time of the frontline states that the Beira port was actually suffering because there were lots of I don't know what were the issues anyway, but the port from Zimbabwe had to come to South Africa through the rails or something to South Africa to export their goods to the world because the Beira port was really in bad shape. All right, but now if the case is the fact that South Africa now has to ship its own product, some corporate in South Africa have to ship their product from South Africa to a port in Mozambique. I don't know if that's Beira, but probably I'll do some more research. But Mike Burke in this video speaks about that, and they have to export those goods from Mozambique because those ports are more efficient than the ports in South Africa, bro. So anyway, these are kind of like the issues now that seem to be giving birth to a clash between Mike Burke and GAYTON Mckenzie, between DA and PA. It's a fresh argument stating that while GAYTON Mckenzie and the PA are kind of like okay with passing some of these proposals by the ANC, even if they would harm, in the language of Mike Burke anyway, even if they would harm the citizens of South Africa, Mike Burke harm the citizens of South Africa in order to keep the GNU intact, so that the likes of the MK party, Jacob Zuma, the likes of EFF, Julius Malema, will not step in to into the GNU. Mike Burke says we have to do our best. My book argues that whatever the case is, we have to do our best. Whether MK gets in, whether EFF gets in, our job is to simply do our best and serve South Africa. And whatever the case is, we did our best, so that history would really judge us based on that basis that we did our best. And later in this video, you hear the likes of Prince Mashela arguing that if the DA has to leave the GNU, South Africans would be terribly sad because it would almost signal what he calls a political chaos. And bro, it's getting heated. And the next 12 days in South Africa, man, we have to really hold on tight to our seats. But let's quickly listen to Mike Burke and Prince Mashele argue. I think this is an excerpt from the conference that being hosted by Biz News, in a really interesting conference. I really hope that one day I'll be able to attend. But listen to Mike Burke, really intelligent speech, questions, series of answers to questions Alec Hogg poses to both him and Prince Mashele. And share your thoughts, guys. Share your thoughts in the comments.
Would you guys indulge me? Let's hear from Mark exactly what happened or what went down the last 2 weeks, and indeed the highlights of what happened, or lowlights, what happened yesterday.
Yeah, I think it's maybe worth backtracking to about 2 weeks prior to the failed 19 February budget. So the Minister of Finance had started to communicate to Cabinet that there might be a tax increase of some sort, which already was a departure from the midterm budget statement, which came to Parliament at the end of last year. So if you imagine a political agreement, quite formalized, that said no more bailouts and no new taxes, end of last year. Come this year, a couple of weeks before the budget statement should go ahead, the minister started making noises about tax increases without being very specific. He then as I understand it, shared with our Deputy Minister of Finance, a DA guy, Ashur Sarupin, that there will be a VAT increase, a value-added tax increase, and the quantum of that might be as high as 200 basis points.
In other words, 2%, from 15 to 17.
That's right. And Ashur indicated to him that the DA would not be able to support that. A day or two after that, our top leadership also met with the minister to try and convey to him that this is not something we would be able to stand behind. For reasons still unbeknownst to me, and what I can now only describe as ANC hubris, they decided to go ahead despite our protestation. On the day of the budget speech on this 19th of February, it was announced to Cabinet a couple of hours before the speech that this was the direction, and a lot of the parties within Cabinet were opposed to it, including 4 ANC ministers, saying, but we can't subject South Africans to more taxes, especially not value-added tax, because even though a large chunk of VAT is paid by more affluent South Africans, it disproportionately hurts poor people because they're already so constrained in what they can buy in their basket of goods. And the ANC had to backtrack on the 19th of February and set a new date, which was the 12th of March. And engaged actively. So their leader met with ours, and we kept indicating that we're not in a position to support tax increases. Many conversations were held. We were open-minded and assumed an open negotiating posture on what could be done. But if you'll briefly indulge me, we presented 6 points as an alternative to tax increases. The first said no more taxes, be it corporate, income or value-added tax. The second said, let's collect taxes already due. SARS had indicated to us with 3.5 billion rand more, they'd be able to take their compliance from 63 to 67%, which would have delivered revenue far in excess of what a VAT increase might have brought in. So a VAT increase could ostensibly have brought in about 60 billion rand, but there are lots of indications that it wouldn't have been as high as that, and tax compliance would have gone down further. Third point was we need to open up the economy. We need to allow our ports to function. We need to get Richards Bay and Cape Town devolved and ideally privatized. The fourth point was we needed to do emergency spending cuts on things like advertising budgets. I mean, the NHI spent 30 million rand advertising program that is not viable. It cannot be funded. So cut government advertising budgets, cut the executive class dining privileges and all of the catering budgets. Do those things today. And then the point after that, our fifth point, is to do a comprehensive spending review, starting with a 3-month sprint and a longer 9-month strategic process. And what we would aim to do there is find an efficiency across government. To give you one example, PRASA found that 10% of their workforce were ghost employees. It doesn't exist. They're paying these salaries, but nobody's there. And that's just one, leg of the transport behemoth that sits under government. And then finally, the sixth point is let's not cut any critical services, doctors, nurses, teachers. And let's not cut anything on the front line. And let's also make sure while we're doing that we think smartly about social spending, maybe convert it into a job seekers grant, but we're also not proposing cutting social spending, which is another ANC lie. So within our 6-point plan, which is fairly politically neutral, we said tax increases aren't needed. And of course, yesterday the ANC went ahead and proposed a budget, which again we cannot support, which will have 100 basis points or 1% over 2 years. So 0.5% this year and 0.5% next year.
Just say that again. You cannot support. What does that mean?
South Africans can't afford to pay more taxes. And while we've got this budget being brought forward, it ignores the fundamental inhibitors of our economy. So if we haven't got a plan in place to devolve some of the worst functioning ports in the world, I mean, I've shared this with you on the show before, Alec, but perhaps for the audience. South African companies are now taking their produce, putting it on trucks, getting it to the border, taking it into Mozambique, paying for an escort in a country in conflict to get it to a privately run port in Mozambique by a South African company, Grindrod, and shipping it from there because that's more efficient than our ports. What I've just described is ludicrous. So we need to remove these inhibitors on the economy as part of our budget process and then not tax South Africans to a level that they can't afford.
Mark, I get it, but my question really was, this morning we had GAYTON Mckenzie here. I know you were still in Cape Town, or you didn't see GAYTON. And he said that if the DA were to die on this hill, the EFF have already said they'll come in. So the government of national unity will continue, but the DA will be out, the EFF will be in. And he said, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Is that a possibility?
So many things wrong with that statement. The first is it wouldn't be a government of national unity. It will be a government of national division. The EFF just does not ideologically align with the partners in the GNU at the moment. I can't imagine the Freedom Front, for example, staying in a GNU with the EFF in it. So who would be left? It'd probably be the ANC, the PA, and the EFF. But there's another problem with that statement, which is the EFF has said they won't punish South Africans with VAT increases. Their voter base cannot afford anymore. And this has turned out to be a fairly empty ANC threat. I mean, it came out a week and a half ago in the Sunday papers saying that the ANC might do a deal with the EFF. And we said to them, you know what Churchill said, do your worst and we'll do our best. And it turns out that the EFF wasn't willing to do such a deal. So I think GAYTON is on the wrong side of this equation. I find him a very entertaining speaker. But the fact is, he's now in the camp of proposing a 1% VAT increase over 2 years. That's a bad camp to be in.
Sure. Prince, you the political analyst sitting amongst us. We've got the economist and the financial guy. What do you make of all of this? Are we heading for... GAYTON said the next 12 days are going to be the most crucial in South Africa's history.
Look, it sounds to me that the DA, obviously through Mark, their problem with this budget is this 0.5% VAT increase. Doesn't say anything else other than that. I didn't hear anything else other than that. If that is the case, it's actually the easiest to solve. They accept the whole budget. The only thing they don't accept is this 0.5 percentage point. That's what I'm hearing. So they will have to negotiate that between them and the ANC. And if they negotiate, there are two possible outcomes, and there is no middle ground. One, either the ANC drops that, or the DA accepts that. It's just no middle ground. And one of them will have to give in. I'm not sure if it's going to be the DA or the ANC, but certainly one of them will give in. That's one. Two, I agree with GAYTON. You cannot afford to have the DA out of this journey. Full stop. Under the circumstances, if the DA is out, the EFF is in, that's a doomsday scenario. And all of us as South Africans, we are going to be extremely unhappy with the DA walking out of this. So when you fight, keep that in mind. But the options is either you accept or the ANC drops it.